Hello, Psych 101 students. Welcome to Module 6, Chapter 12, Learning Objective 4. We'll look at the big question, how do other people influence you? And in this learning objective, we will cover groups, conformity, and compliance. So let's start with this statement that perhaps the single most important lesson from social psychology is that the power of the social situation is much greater than most people believe. There are many behaviors that we do based on social settings and conditions. The social facilitation effect is when the mere presence of others enhances our performance. What's considered the world's first social psychology study was conducted by a researcher named Triplett in 1897. And what he did was he had cyclists ride either on their own or along with others. And he did this a number of times and found that there was an 8.6 mile per hour difference on average when people rode with others, an increase of 8.6 miles an hour compared to when they just rode alone against the clock. So it showed that people cycled faster when they cycled with others compared to doing it alone. Social facilitation tends to occur if the task is simple or familiar, such as cycling or running, versus others, or not versus, but with others versus doing it alone. We tend to run or cycle faster when we're doing it with others. Social loafing, on the other hand, is the tendency for people to work less hard in a group than when working alone. So when other people are around to do the work, you may tend to slack off a little bit. The larger the group, the more social loafing is likely to occur. One example is group projects in school. If you've ever been involved in group projects, you might notice that sometimes not every member pulls their weight in the group and does as much. I mean, usually, some people may take that opportunity to engage in social loafing, because especially like if there's just one grade for the group that everyone in the group gets, then you don't necessarily, you can still benefit from others doing the work, even if you loaf yourself. Social loafing is influenced by cultural factors. It tends to occur more in individualistic cultures, such as the US, and it tends to occur less in collectivist cultures, right? For example, China. In fact, in a collectivist culture, people tend to work harder when they are in a group than when they are alone. Whereas in a culture like the US, there's a higher probability that people will engage in social loafing. De-individuation is the tendency of people to engage in atypical behavior when stripped of their usual identity. This is caused by a feeling of anonymity and a lack of personal responsibility. If you can't be identified, then as an individual, then you'll do things that you might not normally do. And we've probably all would have witnessed, online bullies, for instance, because as long as they're anonymous and all you can do is, see their login name or whatever, then and people tend to perhaps to what do I want to say here? People might be meaner um, or more harsh in their words when there's no way to identify who that individual is. De-individualized people become more vulnerable to social influence. Think of, for example, unruly crowd behavior or mob behavior. I mean, if you're just part of a large group, uh, then and the group starts misbehaving, then people will often just kind of go along with it. They just kind of take on the influence of the large group and do things once again that they wouldn't normally do alone. Um, you can also see it in the examples, shown here in the pictures. If you're cheering for a sports team, you might act crazy and shout things that you normally wouldn't do, or dress up in funny costumes, or face paint or something. Because once again, you're not really being seen as an individual. You're just part of a mass of people. This is one of the reasons why people will wear masks in certain settings to conceal their identity, because this would encourage individuation or de-individuation, excuse me. So like warriors in a tribal culture that are going off to battle or to raid other homes or whatnot. I mean, they will often paint their faces, and this is like to make it so that they become like a new person, or they're not the same individual that's normally a loving father and responsible member of a tribe, and now they're going off to war, so they'll face paint their faces to become a new person in a sense. A better example might be like think about the KKK and their white hoods. It's so they can do atrocious things and no one can recognize who they are. I mean, it frees them to engage in acts that they normally wouldn't do if they could be identified. It's also the reason why they have uniforms in any military, and all the uniforms are the same, and because so that you become just part of the whole fighting machine rather than an individual, and so you can once again engage in acts that you normally wouldn't as an individual. Okay. um Group, let's look at group decision making, and we'll start with the risky shift effect, which refers to that groups often make riskier decisions than individuals do. People in a group may try something dangerous that none of them would have tried alone. So you might be with a group of friends, and somebody suggests jumping off a cliff into the water below, and by yourself you might not do it, but maybe none of the members would do it by themselves, but you all kind of encourage each other, and you're more likely to take that kind of risk. Um, this is related to the concept of group polarization, which is the tendency for members of a group discussing an issue to move towards a more extreme version of the positions they held before the discussion began. So there was a study done, for instance, where they had a group of slightly unprejudiced students. They gave tests to the subjects to measure their level of prejudice before this study, and so they put together a group of slightly unprejudiced students, and they had them discuss racial issues. And after the discussion, they measured their level of prejudice, and they were less prejudiced than when they began. So the group shifted in the direction that most of their members were already leaning. And they did the same thing with a group of slightly prejudiced students. they had them discuss racial issues, and when they measured them later, they were even more race or prejudice than they were at the start. So the group shifted in that direction. So whichever way the group's kind of leaning, based on the individual members, whichever way that it's leaning to start with, if they discuss um, the issue, then they will tend to have stronger opinions after a discussion. Think about, for instance, you see a movie and you kind of liked it, and then you actually discuss the movie with some other people that also kind of liked it. Afterwards, you'll probably like it. You'll probably even have a stronger liking for the movie because it's their opinions supported your opinions. That was a pretty good movie, and so your opinion shifts in the way that the group is already leaning. And we see this with certainly in our society here with liberals and conservatives with their political ideologies. You know, if you're whichever way you're leaning, if let's just for instance say you're conservative, and let's say you watch conservative news and they support your views, and you go on conservative websites and your views are supported there. I mean, your views will become more extreme. And same thing for liberals. If you know keep getting your viewpoints reinforced because you participate in groups or you watch news that also leans the same way, then you get polarized to a more extreme position. Um, Groupthink is used to describe an extreme form of group polarization, and it typically occurs when a group is under intense pressure, facing external threats, and already biased in a particular direction. Um, Typically, there's an emphasis on group consensus at the expense of critical thinking. So, like, we've all got, this is what we need to do. We all have to agree, and what happens is that dissension ends up being discouraged. So, even if somebody has different ideas or they don't feel that the decision they're leaning towards is the right one. I mean, people tend to set aside their personal beliefs because they feel like, oh, I should just go along with the group. Members tend to reassure each other that they're doing the right thing, and this concept of groupthink has been used to describe certain certain situations. For instance, the invasion of Iraq by the U.S. It's the government wanted to make a response, a response, and even though it turns out there was a lot of people that thought it was a bad idea. They didn't speak up because the group, the group in power was kind of leaning towards the idea of an invasion, and people put aside their own thoughts that it might be a bad idea just to kind of go along with it. They also use another example would be the Space Shuttle Challenger explosion. It turns out that there was a lot of people that were really concerned before it ever launched that there was dangers, um, and and yet there was such an emphasis on going ahead with it, and that was really important to to meet the timetable and launch it when it was supposed to. That a lot of these people's opinions just kind of got stifled. You had a group think mentality that we have to do this, and so it's kind of when you hear the term group think, it's almost like a group disease where the group's not functioning properly, um, and people aren't being allowed to voice their concerns or their disagreements, and so the group just moves forward. Okay, let's go ahead. Conformity. Um, this is the tendency of people to alter the behavior as a result of group pressure. Um, there are two types, or two main reasons, I should say, that people behave in the ways that others do and conform to others' behaviors. The first is called normative influence. Normative influence occurs when to be liked or to be accepted or to avoid looking foolish, we go along with what the group does. For example, people generally stand facing the door in an elevator. So what if you walked into an elevator and everyone was facing the back of the elevator? Well, it turns out that most people would end up turning and facing the back just to fit in. You can see this actually in a video I've included. It's the one that follows this video. So take a look and you can see an example of this happening in an elevator. People just conforming and going along with the group because everyone else is doing it a certain way. The second reason is called informational influence, and this occurs when we assume that the behavior of a group provides information about the right way to act. So it's not like you're just going along to fit in, but in this case, it's the feeling that, oh, they know something that I don't. This group knows something, and so I should I should conform to their behavior because it may be very important to. For instance, you see a crowd running, a whole bunch of people running in a certain direction, then it's a sign that there's probably something that they're running from, and so that would be informational influence. You might decide to run along with them, even though you have no idea why. Example I was thinking about there from my own experiences is I do a lot of driving in different states. I go on a driving trip, basically every summer, and when I'm driving in a new state or a new city, and I'm going along with the traffic, we're all over the speed limit a certain amount, and then if I see all of a sudden, like I feel at times though, I'll feel like every other driver is like slowing down. It's like the people that live there in that area, and then basically that's kind of a sign that maybe there's a reason to slow down at this point. And there's times where I've just kind of noticed it. All of a sudden, I'm going faster than everyone else. I was doing the same speed as them, but they've slowed down. Well, it's a sign that I don't know. Maybe the police presence is very heavy in that particular area or something like that. Or anyways, it's information that you take, and so it's not that you want to fit in. I mean, if I end up slowing down too, it's because I feel like, oh, they've given me some information, and I'm gonna, and so I'm gonna follow them because they might know something that I don't. Okay, oops, too far back. Okay, in a classic study by Solomon Asch, he demonstrated, the topic of conformity in a series of experiments in the 1950s. In his study, participants in a group had to decide which of the three comparison lines matched the reference line, and they had to say their answers out loud. And as you can see in this one example here, it wasn't meant to be a difficult task. I mean, if you have normal vision and you're not under any strange influence, I mean, you can see that reference line matches line number 2. But suppose you were in a group, with a bunch of other subjects, and like there's, I don't know, let's say half a dozen people ahead of you, and each one of them says number 3 is the answer. The question is, what are you going to do when it comes to you? Everyone else ahead of you has said number 3. And you looked at it originally and thought number 2. It turns out that the participants tended to conform to the social norms by giving the wrong answer, even when that answer was obviously wrong. Like I said, it's not a really difficult task. In fact, only 25% of the subjects gave the correct answer in all 12 trials that they had. So that means like 75% of people of the, that were in these studies conformed on at least one of the 12 trials, to the group, just to go along with them. They conformed, in this case, due to normative influence. They did not want to look foolish by going against the group. I've included a video that talks about this particular study, so make sure you take a look at that. Social norms are expected standards of conduct which influence behavior. They indicate which behaviors is appropriate in a given situation. Also, how people will respond to those who violate norms. Groups do tend to enforce social norms. So these are, things that you learn growing up and as you're socialized by your parents and others. You learn to stand in a line. If let's say you're buying tickets at an event or something, and not to like cut into the line. If you try that, the people are going to get angry. The group is going to enforce, hey, you need to go to the back of the line. You learn in school to go, and when you go to school, you have to go into your class and sit at your desk or your table. That's expected at the start of class. You shouldn't be standing around in groups or anything. Like you go sit down so the class can start. I mean, like, these are just basic rules that we learn. You drive on the right side of the road, for instance. You keep your lawn cut to a respectable length. This is one that I experienced this in the past in one of the houses I lived in. I've never really cared much about lawn maintenance. I'm somebody that will let my grass grow because I don't really care about how it looks, but other people do, and I kept finding this out because I would let my grass grow, and my neighbor was this older retired guy, and he would make comments all the time like, "Oh, the grass is getting kind of long, Kevin," and like, just to put pressure on me to cut it, and it worked. I mean, I would go cut my lawn when he made a comment, or he might say things like, "Do you need to borrow my lawnmower, or is your lawnmower working all right?" And he'd make comments like this just to get me to cut my grass. And um, anyways, these are social norms. They're not, in many cases, they're not laws or anything like that, but we all learn in a society that there are certain rules that we're all going to follow. Okay, compliance is the tendency to agree to do things requested by others. So these three persuasion techniques listed here, they're also shown in table 12.1 in your textbook, which I have here. I'm going to leave this for you to just read these over on your own. It's on page 486, this table. I really don't have anything to add to it. They're pretty straightforward, I think. So, you can be tested on them. Make sure you do read these three techniques, about these three techniques, and read the examples listed here. But I think it's clear enough that I'm not going to go into it myself. So that concludes learning objective 4.